And we're gonna let Maria kick it off today.
I'm gonna have to share the screen.
Okay.
So Maria, it's all yours.
All righty. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So you
Okay.
wanna hit the share screen?
I'll share screen
Yeah,
and go to the PowerPoint.
yeah.
All right.
That's, yeah, there you go.
And
Okay.
then from
Start the
beginning.
slideshow from beginning. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Oops,
it's
right,
beginning
there
right
we
before
go.
that.
There.
There's-
Okay. Well, I'd
You all
like to
set?
thank Michael for inviting me to speak today. And I'd also like to thank my sister Judy for helping me to prepare for today's talk. And the name of my book is Behind the Camera, American Women Photographers Who Shaped How We See the World. It's written by me, Maria Ausherman, and the foreword is written by Pulitzer Prize winning Associated Press photojournalist Amy Sancetta. And she explains how she is inspired by the women chronicled in this book. And the introduction and drawings are by artist Fontaine Dunn. And she emphasizes that we hope the true stories of these photographers will hopefully inspire you to continue with your own documentation of what's important to you through photography. I want to thank you for your time today. And what follows are highlights of my book, chronicling the lives and art of 16 women photographers. These photographers will be presented in chronological order. And I'll start with a brief introduction, followed by 2 photographs from each of the photographers mentioned in the book to share their artistry and achievements. And hopefully this will help you better understand how they have shaped how we see the world. The history of photography has largely been told in terms of the accomplishments of male photographers, and it still is, and that has to change. I want people to understand the encouragement women photographers received from female-led networks. They depended on each other as teachers and mentors. The camera was a means of independence as women redefined their positions in society and defied conventions. These women artists lived through an amazing amount of historic events, from gaining the right to vote, living through 2 world wars, economic depression, struggles against racism, sexism, poverty, and environmental devastation. A big challenge for scholars today is the disappearance from the historical record, including biographical details and artwork destroyed unintentionally and intentionally. Careers were cut short by the expectation that they assume all child rearing and domestic responsibilities after marriage. Often this caused the prevention of marriage, domestic turbulence, and divorce. Also, careers were downplayed and their contributions ignored until more recently. The irony of bringing to light previously neglected female photographers is that women artists generally prefer to be judged on the merits of their work, independent of their gender and sexuality. Although they had to push back against sexism and misogyny, few were feminists actively involved in the collective struggles for women's rights. So I'm going to start now with Gertrude Casimir. And she helped to shape the way we all photograph today because she was one of the first photographers to focus on the family. 5 of Casimir's portraits were published in Alfred Stieglitz's Camera Notes in 1899. And as you probably all know, Alfred Stieglitz was the leader of the art photography movement in America and helped to establish a lot of these early women photographers' careers. He declared Casimir as the leading artistic portrait photographer of the day. And this is called The Manger, and it shows the influence of Stieglitz's pictorialist philosophy. He believed that photographs should resemble paintings and therefore not be sharply focused. And there's no baby in her lap, that's just drapery. She really shows in this photograph a reverence for maternity. Her most famous photograph is called Blessed Art Thou Among Women, and it became a symbol of the joys of being a mother. Now we go to Frances Benjamin Johnston, and she grew up to become one of America's most famous photographers of her day. And she was the Washington, D.C. photographer for 5 American presidents. And this is a picture of her. This portrait suggesting Johnston's values has also been adopted as a symbol of feminism. It's called the Rebel. It's a bold statement of independence in the male-dominated world in which Johnston made a place for herself as a photographer and artist. And she's known for her feistiness and her drive. And she wanted to be one of the boys, to drink and smoke and establish herself in her own right. And then this is Treasurer's Staircase. It's part of the Hampton Institute series, which supports Booker T. Washington's emphasis on the virtuousness of work. And this photograph advocated the avoidance of mechanical, repetitive tasks and encouraged working with one's hands to improve the mind, body, and soul. And it's one of Johnston's most frequently reproduced photographs today, and for one that she's best known. Her interest in American architecture inspired her to complete a 9 Southern state survey of historic architecture with money from Andrew Carnegie. And it took her 12 years to complete, and it's considered her greatest contribution to the history of architecture. And you can see these photographs in the Library of Congress today. And you can go to see these buildings that are in the southeastern states, and especially if you visit the historic districts that she actively helped to preserve. We come now to Alice Austin. She was born in Staten Island, New York, and she grew up in a home known as Clear Comfort. It was built in 1690, and it offered waterfront views of Brooklyn, the Manhattan skyline, and Jersey City. And Alice Austin was an expert on 19th century life and architecture in Staten Island, which was her hometown. And this is called the Darned Club. She's on the far left. And this is a picture of her friends. They all went to school together, and they spent much time in each other's homes. And the picture reveals something about her personal life. She spent 53 years of love and devotion with Gertrude Tate, but due to their family's disapproval, they couldn't be buried together. And this is SS Finland, steerage at supper. Alice Austin lived near Ellis Island, and she was very interested in the immigrant experience. So you see a family here in the middle of a meal on the deck of a ship. The Alice Austin House you can visit it today. It's a National Historic Landmark, and it's a house museum devoted to Alice Austin's legacy. As Alice Austin explained, I'm happy that what was once so much pleasure for me turns out now to be a pleasure for other people. Zaida Ben Youssef focused on making artistic portraits of people, especially celebrities of her day. She worked hard in her studio to show how they were special. And she frequently posed before her own camera, dressed in elaborate outfits, as one of the first to use herself as subject matter. Here's a self-portrait. She's projecting herself as a stylish, assertive, high-minded artist, and she boasted she could make a living independently, despite the limited number of careers open to women at that time. This is the odor of pomegranates. The pomegranate is a symbol of resurrection, and she blends the dress with the folded drapery backdrop to show her awareness of the Art Nouveau, a movement that had swept through Vienna and Paris, which was characterized by elongated forms and floral motifs. We come to Anne Brigman. She was born into a close-knit family descended from the island's earliest Christian missionaries in Hawaii. She lived in Nuuanu-Pali, a lush mountainous region above Honolulu on the island of Oahu. She believed male and female spirits were to be found everywhere, in rocks, the water, trees, in the sky. She called herself a child of the tropics. When she was 16 years old, she moved to California, and her first excursion to the Sierra Mountains, one of her favorite places, reminded her of her time outdoors. And this is called The Bubble. Seeking freedom from social constraints, Brigman was the first photographer to make nude self-portraits outdoors. For her, the female body was a source of creative energy that was liberated in nature. Freedom meant leaving the civilized world long enough to enter a dialogue with the surrounding landscape. And we come to incantation. Here a nymph stands on a rocky cliff and stretches her arms up to the sky in awe of the beauty of nature. We come to Jessie Tarbox Beals. She was one of the first female journalists, and she's known as a storyteller with a camera. After her divorce, Beals and her daughter moved to Greenwich Village, and that's where she opened a studio, art gallery, and tea room. And her quick wit and often brilliant conversation made her a popular companion. Inspired by these writers and artists, she continued to take pictures, and she aspired to be a successful artist. And here's her picture, Alice Sit by the Fire, Beals makes it clear that this store is a place where customers can stay a while, relax, chat, and have tea. This is Edna St. Vincent Millay and Edmund Wilson. Her husband sits behind them. An urban scarecrow keeps guard over two signs, pick no flowers and keep off the grass, though the yard is dirt. The year this photograph was taken, Millay received a Pulitzer Prize for her poetry and was the third woman to win the award. Bayard Wooten designed the first Pepsi-Cola logo, became the first female member of the North Carolina National Guard, and the first female aerial photographer in America. And she was born in the small town of New Bern in eastern North Carolina. She decided that North Carolina was her home and that the South would suit her best. And she moved to Chapel Hill and opened a photography studio there because she knew that working in a university town was good for business. And this is a tobacco farmer and his three sons in North Carolina. And the picture emphasizes the togetherness of this family. Tobacco growers put North Carolina on the map as early as the mid-17th century, and tobacco is still one of the most important industries in that state. And this is Irons in the Fire. And you can see it's a testament of working class respectability. A woman wearing an apron sits in her rocking chair next to a fire, heating 4 of her 5 irons. We come to Doris Ullman. She was one of the first photographers to portray people in the rural South. The New York City native wanted to record things that she felt people in New York City were missing. A quality measured not by wealth, but by character. And this is her picture of Katie Jones. Ullman brought to her task a profound respect for her subject. She presents a stoic and dignified self-containment. Here is Baptism, South Carolina. Immersion in a river that runs through a forest serves as a metaphor of rebirth and renewal. And the photo depicts a Southern Christian ritual with solemnity and grace. We come to Imogen Cunningham. She's known for her career as a teacher and her many friendships with other artists. She took photographs every day of her life. Horticulturists and other scientists continue to use her pictures of plants in their work. Cunningham explained why she was drawn to photographing flowers. She said, "The reason I really turned to plants was because I couldn't get out of my own backyard when my children were small. That was when I started photographing what I had in my garden." In fact, friends thought Cunningham could have been an excellent botanist. And this is Magnolia Blossom. It's one of her best known photographs. This was an important image for Cunningham, a 2-year-long in-depth study of the magnolia blossom. And here's her portrait of Frida Kahlo. Cunningham belonged to an international set of painters, writers, photographers, and philosophers. So it's not surprising that she would create a portrait of the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, who was very proud of her heritage and delighted in wearing traditional clothing. And Cunningham captures Kahlo's steely reserve to be taken seriously. Now we come to Elise Forrest Harleston. And she is South Carolina's first African-American female photographer. She's known mostly as a portrait photographer, and she was ahead of her time as the only professional African-American photographer in the early 20th century who took photographs outside a studio. Most African-Americans were afraid to call attention to themselves outside. She was born in Charleston, and she met her future husband in Charleston. He asked Elise to enroll in a photography class in New York City so that after his return, they could be married and open a portrait studio. So they married as planned, and the couple opened a joint studio and exhibition space in Charleston. And together they were business owners, image makers, and community activists involved with the NAACP. And this is Seated Child. And Elise Harleston photographed a broad cross-section of African-American Charleston residents. She took several studio photographs of children, including her many nieces and nephews. And this young child sits comfortably and looks at the camera with curiosity and intelligence. I used this one for my book cover. I'm a teacher, and every teacher wants all their students to graduate. And this is Girl with Diploma. And Elise Harleston shows this elegantly dressed high school graduate displaying her ring as well as her diploma. Because public schools for African-American students in Charleston went only to the 8th grade, parents who could afford it sent their children to the private Avery Institute. So that this girl posed with her diploma, it indicates the importance of education to Charleston's African-American middle class in the early 20th century. Now we come to Laura Gilpin, and she's distinguished for her landscape photography of the Southwest and the culture of its native people, especially the Navajo and Pueblo tribes. Her greatest accomplishments were her Western landscapes, a field of work she pursued for over 60 years. And she wrote home saying, "The more I see of the rest of the world, the gladder I am that I am not only American, but a Westerner. I look for the greatest art the world has yet produced to come from the West." And here we see an Indian family, Acoma Pueblo, and it shows that she understood their desire to retain the best of their traditions while adapting to the modern world. Here is Casablanca, Canyon de Chelly, and Gilpin, along with her partner, Betsy Forster, went down into this canyon and traveled in a horse-pulled wagon to the White House ruins that you see there, the bottom third of the photo. Once inhabited by the Anasazi ancient Pueblos, these cliff dwellings were abandoned by the turn of the 14th century, and they're the longest continuously inhabited landscape of North America. We come now to Dorothea Lange, and she set the standard for engaged, empathetic documentary photography. Her greatest achievements are the photographs she took during the Great Depression. These socially conscious pictures made an enormous impact on how millions of ordinary Americans understood the plight of the poor. Lange's photographs make people realize how anyone could experience the same fate. And she loved photography because she said a camera teaches you how to see without a camera. And her technique made her photographs really memorable. She used close-ups of facial features and gestures to arouse compassion. And this is Funeral Cortege, End of an Era in a Small Valley Town, California. And you can see that Lange brings to mind a sense of displacement resulting from tragedy. This is called One Nation Indivisible. Japanese Americans were forced to move from their homes along the West Coast, leaving behind possessions to settle into internment camps in the desert. And Lange's photographs of these temporary settlements document what's now considered one of the worst violations of American civil rights. This young child is saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and she's about to be taken away and put into an internment camp due to her supposed risk to national security. This is Bernice Abbott. She lives on today for those photographers who see the city as a valid subject for long-term documentary work. And she's responsible for bringing international recognition to the work of French photographer Eugene Atget. And while in Paris, she met Atget, and she admired his style, how he lived entirely for his work, and how all his imagery focused on the city. It was clear that Atget was in love with Paris, and Abbott wanted to take photographs like he did, except of New York. And she acquired his prints and negatives and sailed back to New York to promote his work. And then she began to systematically photograph New York, which was a fast changing city where historic buildings were being torn down almost quicker than they could preserve them on film, which was the same problem Atget had in Paris. This is Cheese Store, and Mandros was one of the many businesses that catered to the growing Little Italy neighborhood, which developed between the 1880s and 1930s. This is Murray Hill Hotel, spiral 112 Park Avenue. And Abbott documents the contrasting geometric shapes created by the contours of New York City buildings here. This is Margaret Burke White. She was responsible for many firsts. She was the first industrial photographer. She was Life magazine's first female photographer, the first American female war photojournalist, the first Western photographer to be officially allowed into the USSR, and one of the first to document the horrors of the Nazi concentration camps after they were liberated. And this is Chrysler Building. The spire of the famous Art Deco building seen from below juts upward into the sky. And since her New York City address was located inside this building, Burke White used this image on a card to announce the beginning of her rapidly rising career. And the Chrysler Building, built in the 1920s, is 77 stories high, and it was the world's tallest building for 11 months until the construction of the Empire State Building. And here we see another photo by Margaret Burke White called Louisville Flood Victims. And she said when she saw people suffering that she would promise herself to try to understand them and tell their stories. And here a group of well-dressed adults stand in line under a billboard advertising there's no way like the American way, and they are victims of devastating floods. We come to Helen Levitt, a lifelong New Yorker who chose the people of New York City as her subjects. She also began to take pictures of mostly children in the streets of Harlem and the Lower East Side, and she wanted to document how people are vitally connected to each other. She called all her photographs New York, so it's hard to tell, you have to really explain what's inside the picture to distinguish them. Here, 4 young girls watch soap bubbles magically drift across a city street, and the bubbles in front of an imposing stone wall dramatically change the forbidden area into a place of wonder. This is, here Levitt reveals the love between a mother and child, and you can see the mother is beckoning her young child to come to her away from a double danger, the spraying fire hydrant and an approaching car. On the opposite side of the street, a crowd of children stands on a stoop, and the frightened child concentrates on her mother's confident smile as she walks toward her. I'm going to end with Carrie Mae Weems. She's alive and well. She's very active today. And she moved to New York City from California, where she met other artists and photographers. And Weems began to use staged events accompanied by text to analyze issues of racism, sexism, class inequities, and power. And to understand her own family history, she explored the movement of African-American families from the South to the North, using her large, close-knit family as a model. And this is called Kitchen Table Series. And Weems is there casting herself as a central character near a kitchen table. And the photograph shows a mother watching her daughter looking down at her notes. The scene documents the process of completing homework and the complexity of their dynamic. Weems is very committed to radical social change. She said any form of human injustice moves her deeply. The battle against all forms of oppression keeps her going and keeps her focused. And while studying the history of art, she asked what is left in and what is left out. Then she tries to think of ways to reposition and insert individuals and groups of people who have not been included in the historical record. And this is from her Louisiana Project series. It commemorates the bicentennial of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. And Weems places herself in a variety of locations around New Orleans as a witness to the experience of African Americans. And the scene here is reminiscent of Andrew Wyeth's Christina's World, painted in 1948, often perceived as the embodiment of a strong sense of longing. And I'll end here with a quote from Weems. She says, "I cannot lead you to anything, but I hope that my work provokes critical thinking. If my work encourages you to ask, what is that? And what does it mean? Then I think I have done my job." And I want to thank you for your time today. And I was gonna say something else, but let's see. Well, basically, I lost my last papers, but I just wanted to tell you that the Behind the Camera book is available either on Amazon or on bookshop.org. And I first learned about these photographers through my study of Francis Benjamin Johnston And this is my earlier book that's going to be reprinted by the University of Alabama Press next fall. And it's called The Photographic Legacy of Frances Benjamin Johnston. And Johnston is the one who really got women photographers together during her time. And so that's how I got interested in doing the anthology. Okay, and thank you so much for your time. And I'm interested in what you think about women photographers and what you learned. And I should also mention that at the back of this book, there are questions to help you explore your own photography, you know, questions about self-expression, architecture, landscapes, and social issues. So I'll take your questions whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Oh, you're welcome.
Quite a project there. Anybody have anything for Maria?
Well, I had a question. I got something I didn't understand. This is your book?
Yes,
Okay.
the behind the camera.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Right. So you mentioned for Casimir, I think it was your first photographer.
Yes.
And I think you said that the Manger was published in Camera Notes.
Yes, it was one of 5.
Stieglitz's book.
Yeah, his book, Camera Notes. Yeah.
Because I'm fuzzy on this, but I think Camera Notes was something that Stieglitz did for the New York Photo
Yes.
Club. That photo also appears in Camera Work, which is what Stieglitz what he started after he left Camera Notes. So I'm not sure they appeared in both. Maybe you could.
Oh,
correct me.
I'm not real sure about that. I don't know.
Yeah,
I would
because
have to,
it's actually on the photo is actually on page 38 in Camera Works in the first volume.
Oh, okay.
So just a note.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then Anne Brigman, she's an interesting photographer. It's my understanding, if I remember correctly, she had some accident that severed her left breast.
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how that affected her artistic, because she did nudes, and I'm not sure.
Right.
Well, after that.
Yeah, and she didn't show her, any kind of that she had any problem with her body.
Right.
And the photographs are usually dimly lit and far away and a little fuzzy, pictorial like.
Right. The last thing I was going to say is that the bubble that you showed there, that's also in Camera Works. So,
Yeah, Stieglitz is very important to Anne Brigman's career as well.
Yeah.
Okay, it's in Camera Work. Okay,
very good.
Thank you.
Just
and
some notes.
Stieglitz is also important for Frances Benjamin Johnston too.
Yeah.
In fact, Johnston and Casimir were both jurists in Stieglitz's contest. So they were involved.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have anything?
Well, I'm curious about how many women photographers were perhaps initial candidates for your book, and how you decided on which ones to select.
That's a very good question. I owe an enormous, big thank you to Naomi Rosenblum. And she wrote A History of Women Photographers in 1994 and featured 240 artists from the 1830s to the late 20th century. So I thought I'd just focus on American photographers because that's what I know best through Johnston. I just chose photographers that were associated with Johnston or people who knew of Johnston later. And so that's really how I made my selection. But Naomi Rosenblum is really the scholar of most importance. And I do have small bibliographies after each chapter, so that if you want to get into the details of each of these photographers' lives, you know, the bibliographies will definitely help you out.
On that same note, you didn't include several of the more modern women photographers like Arbus and
Well,
you know,
Arbus is, they're very careful to share the work of Diane Arbus, the
Okay.
people who own her work.
uh-huh.
And also it's harder for me to share modern photographers, because when you're still alive, you have a lot to say, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes. And I basically wanted to keep my research to, you know, archival work. And like I said, Johnston was my first love, and she was born, you know, right around the Civil War. So, and she's lived through the early 1950s.
Yeah, well, that was part of my comment, was that I think it's nice. I think it's good that you didn't include a lot of modern, because a lot of us are aware of those photographers.
Sure.
And we're not so aware of the historical perspective that you're trying to give here with the photography.
Oh, that's interesting. And Amy Sancetta, who wrote the foreword, she, you know, really says she was inspired by people like Johnston and Dorothea Lange, and of course everybody knows Margaret Burke White. Some of these photographers are a lot more well known than others.
Right. Ah, you're back.
So I have a question. Yeah, the ones like the last 6 or 8 that you showed of the photographers are very well known.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you did any digging to find maybe people who aren't so famous, but who maybe also help change our vision.
That's real good. I wanted to, I'm a high school teacher, and I was thinking of younger students in particular, and I saw this as an introduction. So I wanted to include people that they might know about already, just as a lead-in. So that's why there's a combination of lesser known and more well-known. And my strength is the earlier photographers. So that's, you know, that was most important to me, but I did want to include people more recently, because I know that photographers probably would like to know more about the more recent photographers as well. So that's why I tried to make a timeline from the late 19th century to the present.
Makes sense.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'd like to know if you're familiar with Myra Albert Wiggins. She was, her dates are 1869 to 1956. And she was one of the first members of the Photo Secession and a colleague of some of the women you wrote about. And I thought I'd mention her to you because I think you would find her of interest. I wrote her biography,
Oh, okay.
which of Kodakari, the photography of Myra Albert Wiggins. And I think you would find that of interest for your work.
Yes, I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate it. I haven't heard of her before, and you know, so I'm looking forward to it. 1869 to 1956, you say?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, anybody else have anything? If not, we'll thank Maria,
You're welcome.
and we will pass the microphone to Patricia.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much, Michael, for including me in the book in this process. I'm excited to share it with you, and I'm really humbled to be following Maria and her great work. And Maria, I've got your book on order, so I'm really looking forward to
Oh, thank you. I hope you
diving
like it.
deep. I'm sure I'll really enjoy it. So I'll just also dive into my work and preface the book by talking a little bit about the project that I've been working on for about 6 years now called Facing Ourselves. And I began that project in a tiny village in southern Italy after I did a residency there in 2011 and decided to go back about 5 years later because I was really interested in how they were coping with the refugee crisis that had landed on their shores. And so this began a process of doing portraits of not only migrants and refugees, but also the communities that were welcoming people into their communities and kind of beginning this conversation in this tiny towns about what does it mean to be a community and how do we expand that community. One of the first statements that really got my attention was in this tiny town where they speak ancient Greek and they have a history of migration, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old, and the Greeks and the Normans. And I asked someone how it was that they were able to be so welcoming when they had so little to share. And this man responded by saying, "We know what it's like to carry a suitcase." So it really has influenced me a lot doing this work, and I have been welcomed into several communities to do portraits and to do workshops and to create this kind of collaborative process. I worked in London with a group called Waging Peace, and in Italy it was Parco Palmieri. And then in Carpinteria, where I have my studio, I was invited to do a project that ran for about a year here. And we did installation photos and we did workshops with teenagers, and several people did their own workshops to help fundraise for the project. And it's been a really interesting opening into collaboration and social justice. So in 2020, I was scheduled to go and do a show in Kansas, in a small town in Kansas, and to start the portraits there. I was going to do the next iteration of Facing Ourselves. And of course, everything shut down. We had to cancel the show. And so in quarantine, I just started wandering with my camera. And I'll show the photos. Hopefully this is going to work to show you this slideshow that I have. But just kind of being awake to what was happening around and what we were not only experiencing here where I live, but all over the country and in fact, all over the world. And so in this process, I really wanted to find some way to try and support different issues that are going on. And so I created this book really as a fundraising tool, and I self-published it and went through this incredible year of not just working with the photos, but working with people and talking to people about what they meant and how we feel about what's happening. And so what I've noticed is that the book has really sort of a talking stick. And I try not to answer questions, but really look for answers in the book. So this is the book. And I am going to hopefully link you to a slideshow. I did a collaboration with a wonderful composer friend of mine who created some music for this slideshow. And it'll give you kind of a sense of the book without flipping through the pages. So hopefully my screen share will work and I can find it for you. Hang on. Sorry. Let's see. Let's see. Sorry about this, guys. Well, I'm not finding it on my desktop. So I'm going to just show you the book. Actually, what I'd like to do is read to you my foreword. This portfolio is the unexpected third chapter of my ongoing Facing Ourselves project, begun in Italy in 2016. Like so many, I had other plans for 2020, but the coronavirus brought me and the rest of the world to a sudden, shuddering, chaotic halt. Attacking all races and socioeconomic groups, the pandemic has hit communities of color disproportionately and broadened the conversation regarding racial and economic justice. These photographs from my small Central California coastal community represent the microcosm of challenges we are facing, together and individually. In the process of creating this body of work, I have found myself not only looking for answers, but sometimes struggling just to understand the questions. I hope in some small way this offering helps further the conversation. Thank you so much to everyone who lent their voices and perspectives during this exploration, who march in search of peace and justice, who create art to remind us of what's important, who write words to inspire us, and to all those who take action to create healthy, equitable, and compassionate communities. All net proceeds from this first edition will benefit ongoing national and international social justice efforts. How we face ourselves and each other is constantly evolving. Shall we turn towards or away from fear? Or shall we face the future head on, adapting to our new world with grace, generosity, and caring? And so this collection begins with the protests really around the murder of George Floyd. And there are a few murals that I photographed here in Santa Barbara that were really telling. And so I open with that. And I'm hoping you'll be able to see the image. In the book, I have given credit to a lot of different people, including these mural artists, and to several organizations, including Silo 118 and the Santa Barbara County of Arts and Culture, who've been really supportive. And it's just a myriad number of people who have been participating in this. Interspersed in the book, I found some quotes that I thought were particularly meaningful. And in this next page, the quote is one by John Lewis. "There comes a time when you have to say something. You have to make a little noise. You have to move your feet. This is the time. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And that's the image. This is from one of the marches in Santa Barbara. And I particularly love this boy and his t-shirt. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, "I love you, Mom." And as a mom, I really love that he honors his mother like that. I don't know if you can read her sign, but it says white silence equals white consent. And I thought that this woman was so beautiful in the way that she was raising her daughters to be aware and to participate. This sign you probably won't be able to read. It says, "I'm not Black, but I see you. I'm not Black, but I hear you. I'm not Black, but I stand with you." And this is in Spanish. Black Lives Matter. What I was struck by in these marches here, and I don't know about in your communities, but with the broad range of people who were participating from all different walks of life and all different points of view. It was really powerful. This next image is actually the cover image, and it's my granddaughter. And I had taken this image of her a few years ago, and she's holding up a photo that I took of her when she was about 2 years old. And I was just playing around with her, and I said, let's take your portrait. And so I did. And then in the process of making this book, which really was all year last year, when the women who were working in the South were murdered, the Asian women were murdered, I posted this image as my way of protesting and participating in the hate movement against the Asian Americans. My granddaughter's Asian American. Her mother is full Japanese American, and her grandparents were actually interred in the camps. And so it's really powerful for me to see my granddaughter carrying this legacy. And the title of this image is basically her racial makeup: Austrian, English, French, German, Irish, Japanese, Scottish, Romanian, Russian, Catholic, Christian, Jewish American. This next page also has a quote by Tenzin Gyatso, who was the 14th Dalai Lama. And he said, "It is not enough to be compassionate, you must act." And this next photograph is of an elderly man in one of the George Floyd protests. And his sign was really meaningful to me. He not only looked like my father, but he was carrying a sign from the high school that I went to here in Santa Barbara High. And his sign says, SBHS, class of 64, we should have done more. These next two pages are really about honoring people that we've lost. The first one is from a George Floyd protest, and the sign says, say your name. You won't be able to read them all. But it's this young man who really felt that it was important to honor all these people who have died in that way. And then the next image is one that you probably, many of you saw, which was the New York Times, the front page of the New York Times, when it says, US deaths near 100,000 and incalculable loss. And it has all the names of the people who had died from the coronavirus by that time. This next image is of a woman that I photographed for my Facing Ourselves project here in Carpinteria. And she was the only Latina who was willing to be photographed for this project. It was during a time of a lot of ICE raids were going on here, and she's undocumented. And so she agreed that I could photograph her in my studio. Her name is Juanita. And when she arrived in my studio, just a little backstory, she saw the portraits that I have been taking all over the world. And we had originally agreed that I would only photograph her from behind. But when she saw the portraits and she saw people coming forward and wanting to be seen, she said I could photograph her however I wanted. And so we did a photo session that was, full facial and also from behind. And her photograph, her face was on the streets in Carpinteria, which was really an affirmation for her, I think, that this is the portrait And in my time here, working on this project, you know, I'm sure all of you had the same experience where you just needed a kind of a breath of fresh air. You just needed a time to kind of reflect and just sort of be in nature. And we were coping with so many different things, and we still are, obviously. And so this next photograph I took on a beach walk. And the quote that I put with it is from Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb. But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might, hang on train, and might with right, then love becomes our legacy. And this final image is from one of the murals in Santa Barbara. And both of these murals are still in town, which I really love. And this is a quote on the mural that says, this is Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So that is my little portfolio of images and thoughts. And we launched the book in July, and first phase was fundraising for the ACLU. Right now, we're doing a fundraiser for the Vermont Haiti Project. And next month, we're going to be fundraising for a group called Storyteller in Santa Barbara that works with low-income and unhoused families, children. So it's been a wonderful way to interact, not just in the creation of the book, but in this ongoing way of being able to work with different groups and talk about what their needs are. And even if we can't raise a lot of money, we're trying to raise consciousness around different efforts that are going on nationally and internationally. We'll also be doing some work in London this fall. So with that, does anyone have any questions for me or comments?
Okay, where can people get your book, Patricia?
They can get the book on the website, the Facing Ourselves website, and also through Chaucer's Books in Santa Barbara. Mhm.
Well, I like the idea of your book. I think it's really, really marvelous.
Thank you.
And I live in Santa Maria, so I'm just up the road from you.
Oh,
So
okay.
I maybe get a chance to go down to your
Yeah.
area and make some photographs.
That would be great. Well, if you come down, please visit me in my studio. I'd love to meet you.
Yeah, okay, great. Great.
That would be great. Yeah. I hope you could see the photographs okay.
They're a little small.
Okay, well, if you go on the website, you can see them a little better.
Yeah. And their website is?
It's facingourselves.org.
Okay.
Which was just posted in the chat.
Okay.
What's next? Do you have a continuation of this?
Yeah, I mean, the continuation right now is just being involved with the book. Again, I was supposed to do that next project in Kansas. I should be there right now, as a matter of fact, doing the next series, and again had to cancel it because of COVID, because they really are having a terrible outbreak there. And so I'm working with the book, and I'm hoping to get back into the swing of doing the portraits. And this was an interesting kind of sideline from that project of the portraits, and I feel like it's been an effective way for people to engage and relate. So yes, definitely we'll be going on with the work, and hopefully in Oswego, Kansas next spring.
Patricia, I found it very compelling. How did you, I mean, there's so many subjects that you're tackling, right? So how did you narrow it down maybe to a few of the things that you touched on? Are these, I mean, Via, your granddaughter, something is dear to your heart, and how did you pick the other issues?
Well, it's interesting. It was such a process of exploration, and also, like I said, conversations. I was speaking with people in London and people in DC and people all over, and with different points of view. And the topics are actually endless, as you know. And so it was really kind of what was happening in my worldview right here. And I tried to say enough, but not too much. There's a word in Italian that I really love, and I have it in the back of my mind when I'm working. It's suggestivo. So it's suggestive. You want to just sort of suggest something so that someone will take it in and feel it however it's appropriate for them. So I really didn't want to sort of, I'm not an expert. I just saw what I saw and felt that those images kind of reflected how I felt about what I was seeing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's beautifully rendered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Patty, this is Tom. It's
Hi,
nice
Tom.
to see you.
Good to
I've
see
known
you.
Patty since she was a little tiny girl.
Yes.
And you have created a beautiful book. Thank you. My question is, how did you collaborate taking the picture and getting it on the wall for the posters? How did all that happen?
With the Facing Ourselves project? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So the
Yes.
first show that I did of the work was in Martignano. And I have this amazing collaborator there in Martignano who I met in 2011, and he kind of runs the local cultural center. And he is really bright and really dedicated to the arts and to community. And so when I came back in 2016, I just showed up at his office and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, I need to understand what's happening and how you guys are coping. And he loved it. And so he did such an amazing job facilitating for me. He would make contacts in the community of portrait subjects. He took me to his grandmother's house, and I had photographed her on my first trip, and she had since died. And so her house became kind of my studio. And then I came back over a few year period with a film crew, and then finally to do the exhibition. And when we did the exhibition, he said, "Let's not tell anybody what we're going to do. Let's just put it up," because it was going to be outdoors. And he arranged with the mayor to get me rent-free on these big billboards that they have in southern Italy, where they're announcing things, and like funerals and like weddings and whatever's going on in town. They don't have a newspaper. And so one night he hired two guys who were like the poster hangers, and we raced all over the community hanging these huge photographs. And the one thing that happened that was really funny was that we were in the piazza about 9 o'clock at night hanging this image of the mayor who had sat for me. And this woman came up very concerned, and she said, "Did the mayor die?" Because they're used to seeing these funeral posters. We said, no, the mayor didn't die, really. So it was quite profound. It was quite profound for me to witness their reaction. They had never been photographed before. And to see themselves in the streets and to see themselves paired with strangers. And we ended up, before I left, having a community conversation where the grandparents and the children and everybody came to this main palazzo and talked about what it means to them to have a community. So that kind of sparked this, possibility. And when I approached the Art Center in Carpinteria, I, detailed what we'd been doing and wondered if they would like to participate, and they did. And so it was the same kind of process. I had an organization that was an arts. What I've discovered in this process is you need political support, you need the arts organization support, you need organizations to help fund it, because I've been self-funding the whole thing. And so it's been quite astonishing to see how people step up and do work that they're capable of doing. One of my dear friends is a fabric artist, and she did a series of workshops and then donated the funds to the project. So it was her way, and they did these arpilleras where they talked about women who were making these scenes with cloth to address some issue or other. And so it's just been this kind of flowering of people getting an opportunity to talk about what's meaningful to them. Does that answer your question, Tom? Yeah, okay, great.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for asking.
What town was this in?
The first show I did is called Martignano,
Uh-huh.
and it's near Lecce in Puglia.
Oh, I was in Lecce a couple years ago, so.
Oh, really? Well, you just missed me doing my show there.
Yeah, it was in 19 or 20, in 19, I think is when I was there.
2019, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, and we don't see here in this country, we don't see the photos of people who have died, and they're all over Italy. You can see them individually, or a lot of times in groups. There's a regular place where people post
Right.
those.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
I would just like to make a comment. Thank you, Patricia. And as I view your work today, and as I viewed it for several years, I am struck with the spontaneity and freedom and the realness of the work, and really seeing in your style how you follow the work rather than have an agenda. And the way that you follow the work allows it to become a really present project. And I just really love seeing that in your work. It isn't so scripted that it has an agenda. And I think this Facing Ourselves project became part of what was going on in the world, and you're following that. So I always look forward to your next adventure, because you are probably one of the most present people that I know. So thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. A long time ago, as a photographer, I learned to show up not knowing, and to not land somewhere with an agenda about what I wanted to see, and sort of frame a project around what I wanted to see, and to really just look at what is. And that was when I was in Southeast Asia in 2006. And, the world, that rapidly changing world that we're in now, was just right in my face. And I had spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia in the 70s. And it really taught me a lot about just going, wow, what's happening? Not what do I want to see? Do I want to see, a headhunting tribe, or do I want to see whatever? And so I thank you for saying that, because it's really important to me to not have an agenda around my work. I might have an idea about what I'm going to look at, but then I try to just stay open to what actually presents itself. So thank you for that.
Okay, if we have nothing else, we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you, Maria and Patricia, for sharing your work with us. As always, we'll link to their books so you can always visit the events page and the book talk if you want to track them down.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, thank you both.
Oh,
Thank you
you're
very much.
welcome. Thank you for being here.
we'll see you next month.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take
All
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.